Good morning. It is Wednesday, January 10th. Israel has been at war for 96 days. I'm Jonathan Shanzer, Senior Vice President for Research at Foundation for Defense of Democracies, and welcome back to the FDD Morning Brief. The fighting continues, and I don't mean in Gaza. We're all still fighting to just stay on top of the news. As soon as you think you have it under control, the headlines change again, which is why you tune in to the FDD Morning Brief. We drink from the information fire hose, so you don't have to. You don't need to thank us. Just keep tuning in. This morning, I'll be joined by Amjad Taha, a remarkable voice on social media out of the Gulf Arab region. We'll speak to him in just a few minutes. But before we do, let's take a spin around the Middle East and look at the numbers. Israel had a tough day on Monday. Rumors were swirling about the death toll. The numbers were actually much lower than some anticipated, but it was still a horrible day for 9 Israeli families of fallen soldiers. Unknown numbers were injured. How about the number 27? That's the number of attacks the Houthis have launched at maritime vessels on the Red Sea. The Brits, the Italians, the Germans, and others are vowing to take action this morning. Okay, 126. That is the number of attacks that we've seen on U.S. forces in Iraq and Syria by Iran-backed militias. In case you're wondering, there have only been 8 U.S. responses so far. The next number, 136. That's the number of hostages still in Hamas hands. Their families are fighting for their return every day. 2,600. That's the number of arrests made so far in the West Bank, where the IDF has been operating almost every night. That is a number that is likely to only grow. 8,000. That's the number of Hamas fighters that have been killed thus far that we know of. Those are the ones that the IDF can confirm. I believe that number is quite a bit higher. There are obviously going to be people found inside those tunnels at some point. The next number, 10,685. That's the number of times sirens have gone off in Israel since the war began. Only 75 of them have been the result of Hezbollah rockets. 21,930. That's the number of targets struck by the IDF since the war began. It's unclear which of those are Hamas and which of those are Hezbollah, but this number is remarkable. And it's not counting the ceasefire here, where the IDF has been operating around the clock for 3 months and counting. 22,000. That's the number of Gazans said to be killed so far in this war, according to the Palestinian Ministry of Health. Of course, it's hard to know if we can trust those numbers. The Ministry of Health was run by Hamas, at least it was. Now we have no idea who's running it, and we have no idea whether that information is reliable. 126,000. That's the number of Israelis that have been removed from their homes by the government to protect them from Hamas and Hezbollah attacks in both the north and the south. However, that's just what the government is reporting. There are probably thousands of others who have vacated their homes voluntarily because they were too close to the front. And finally, 206,080. That's the number of Israelis who have applied for unemployment. Many of these people have found work elsewhere, but there is no doubt that the war is having an economic impact. All wars do. Those are the numbers that I've found so far. Oh, right. One more number, 3. Here are your top 3 big stories for today. Headline 1. Jordanian jet fighters struck targets in Syria yesterday. Yes, you heard that right. The Royal Jordanian Air Force struck a number of targets associated with Iran-backed drug smugglers and Shiite militias. Amazingly, this is not the only strike in recent days. The Jordanians struck other targets a few days prior. The Jordanians have been fighting off the Iran-backed groups for several years now. The regime has been trying to get the highly addictive drug known as Captagon across the border into Jordan from Syria, and the battle has grown more fierce over the last year or so. Once upon a time, Jordan was just a transit point for those drugs heading to the Gulf states, where they could fetch a higher price. Now, Jordan is actually a target market, and the kingdom rightly sees this as a national threat. So now what? If I didn't know any better, I would say Jordan is also at war. Let's add that to the list of all the other countries that have mobilized in one way or another since October 7th. It's a regional thing. And to be clear, the enemy is Iran. The regime would love to destabilize Jordan. This is not lost on anyone, except for maybe the Jordanians themselves, who continue to hammer Israel at every chance they get. What happened to the old adage of the enemy of my enemy is my friend? Headline 2, Secretary of State Antony Blinken says the U.S. doesn't support a ceasefire in Gaza right now. But here's the deal. Blinken said that a lower intensity battle is needed right now to reduce the number of civilian casualties. Yet he also acknowledged that Hamas was hiding behind human shields in this battle, which would then account for the higher number of civilian casualties. Everyone got that? Not sure I do. So now what? I don't doubt that the White House is helping Israel's war effort. I heard nothing but enthusiastic words of thanks from the Israeli officials that I visited last week. But the defeat of Hamas will not come from a low-intensity battle. It will come from giving Hamas more time. And if anything, the tragedy on the battlefield in Gaza on Monday was the result of giving Hamas the time and space that it needed to regroup. So, Mr. Secretary, how about you let the Israelis finish the job? The sooner that happens, the sooner the low-intensity war can actually begin. And that's how this war recedes from the headlines. And finally, headline 3. Hamas leader Yahya Sinwar has surrounded himself with Israeli hostages. Here's what we know. The rumors have been swirling for weeks, but now the news is out in Israel. The Hamas leader who launched this war on October 7th is likely in the tunnels beneath Khan Yunis in central southern Gaza. This is the site of the fiercest battles now taking place. Sinwar knows that surrounding himself with these hostages is his best insurance policy. They are a hedge against an IDF attack against him. So what's my take? Sinwar used Gazans as human shields for years. Now he's using Israelis for the same purpose, and he's putting the Israeli leadership in the ultimate bind. The Israelis made him a marked man. His capture or death will be a major milestone of the war. It might even begin to signal the beginning of the end of the war, if you will. But at the same time, the Israeli leadership has vowed to bring back every hostage in Hamas custody. These two objectives are in clear friction with one another. At some point, some serious decisions are going to have to be made. Okay, those are your headlines. I'm now pleased to welcome Amjad Taha, a political analyst and author based in the UAE. He's been a brave voice on social media, and I'm pleased to have him on the morning brief today. Welcome, Amjad.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Well, you have been really a fabulous voice on social media for the last 3 months. And you've been a huge critic of Hamas and radicalization writ large in the Arab world. How did that happen? How did you arrive at this place?
Well, first, thank you for having me. What I think is my stance comes from a profound love for humanity and a commitment to peace. I believe that by standing together, we can thrive. The Muslim Brotherhood is where the Al-Qaeda in Afghanistan, Hamas in Gaza, ISIS in Syria emerged from. I, like many others, firmly oppose Muslim Brotherhood in the region, and because they are against women's rights, they promote anti-Semitism, and they are against diversity in all our countries, and they glorify death, and we celebrate life. Hamas, Al-Qaeda, ISIS, and all other forms of Muslim Brotherhoods where unfortunately they were allowed to govern in Gaza. And when they did so, they waged war against their own people, kidnapped members of the Palestinian Authority then when they came into power, and they killed, in fact, 500 Muslims from Fatah Palestinian movement, 500 Muslim Arab Palestinians, they were killed. Up to this point, none of those people who were killed, the ones who killed them, being brought to justice. Again, Muslim Brotherhoods, when they were given power in Egypt, they failed in Egypt. They refused to share power with their with other political entities and rivals, and they also released, in fact, Hezbollah prisoners during their control from the prisons, and those were terrorists. In Syria, they joined and worked with ISIS right now, and they were in the north of Syria right now, where some of the Muslim Brotherhoods are controlling. It's full of corruption. You cannot have one street without a crime scene there. So when it comes to Libya, they divided the country into two more states. It was one state, now it's two more, and it's probably going to go to a three states rather than one Libya. In Yemen, they joined the forces right now with Houthis, terrorist militia, and they trying and they did succeeded in destroying some part of the Yemeni army. Look, when it comes to but let's, for example, one of the reasons why I strongly and firmly criticize and will stand with the world against Hamas and against this kind of terrorists is one reason. One just simple example of that would be, look at these Muslim Brotherhoods and their sympathizers or Hamas sympathizers when they occupy a street for 1 hour in Washington. 1 hour they occupy the street. What do you see? There is hate speech, scream of death, shops being attacked, you've been forced to boycott. They divide the community. That's them controlling Washington Street for 1 hour. This is the sign that standing against Hamas today is not due to their anti-Semites and actions only, but also because we care deeply about humanity and we have the vision for a better future for the Middle East.
It's a brave stance. And honestly, I think people do forget that Hamas was actually a splinter of the Muslim Brotherhood. They were created 1987, 1988 during the first Intifada, and it was born out of the Muslim Brotherhood. And I do believe that does account for a lot of the rioting and the protests that we've seen in Washington, but also in London and beyond. Let me ask you, I do feel like there are a lot of misconceptions about this war. There's a lot of misinformation. What do you think are the biggest misconceptions that you see in the Arab world right now? I'm assuming you're watching Al Jazeera, you're watching Al Arabiya, you're watching all of those different channels, you're watching on social media. What do you think the biggest misconceptions are?
I sincerely and honestly don't watch Al Jazeera because so much.
Good for you.
Yes, no one watches Al Jazeera in this side of the world. I think only some extremists on the other side of the world and in the Middle East. Believe it or not, a lot of people in Europe watch Al Jazeera more than the people here in the GCC countries. That's because we do understand the language Al Jazeera tried to push. And we moved way longer and way away from this. We are for prosperity, for diversity, for believing that Israel and all Iran and Turkey and all are part of the history of this, the Middle East, and they are here to stay and to be with us. For us together, we can only thrive and so on. But Al Jazeera lives its own cave where they're still in the cave mind of Bin Laden. That's where they started, and they still stuck that moment. That's the start of Al Jazeera, and they will stuck there. They stuck there. They can only live through a crisis rather than any happy news. Bad news is always good news for them. Anyways, there is a lot of wrong perception sometimes when it comes, for example, when it comes to what's happening in Israel and Gaza, that this is a war against Gaza. And believe it or not, and many people don't believe that. They believe, yes, we do know Hamas started this, and it's a war against a savage terrorist. That's the perception there. Also, there is also a perception that the fact yes, there is Gaza and people are being displaced from south to north, but so there is also Israelis who are being 80,000 people from Israel also been displaced from their houses and been forced to migrate from the north to the south and inside and central of Israel for one reason, because Hezbollah decided to attack them for absolutely no reason, just because they've been peaceful. I think what the world should look at, the Arab world, look at it from the angle, not Al Jazeera angle, not from the vision that you've seen. And the fact that, in fact, you should look into when Hamas leaders asked for the Arab world to protest, please look at the second day Hamas asked for those protests. See which countries attended and how many attended. Rarely any country attended. And when they did so, the protest is a couple of hundreds of thousands. In fact, when I seen in London protest and that kind of anti-Semitism sympathizers there, they were way bigger than their protests were way bigger than where it was in some of the Muslim and the Arab world.
Interesting. So what's the view from the Gulf right now? I mean, obviously we have normalization agreements that were recently signed the last few years. You've got the UAE and Bahrain. The Saudis were reportedly on the fence. How do you think the Gulf states are interpreting the events in the Levant right now?
Well, I can speak as an observer of the general sentiment right now is happening, and based on what has been heard and shared across the various social media news platform, there is a widespread stance against Hamas terrorists in Gaza, coupled with support for people of Gaza against any aggression against them. Now that comes from any sides in this war. The majority understand that Israel was attacked by Hamas terrorists, resulting in a kidnapping of babies as old as 8 months and elders. Indeed, some recognize Israel has the right to defend itself, but it must also carefully assess the risk of endangering civilians. It's also widely understood that Hamas has over 50,000 soldiers, many of whom have large families. Hamas reportedly used and uses these families and others in Gaza as a human shield in the battlefield. And I think what's mainly this side of the world is focusing on is after this war ends, the post-war. After this war ends, I believe the trend towards normalization will continue. There is an understanding that if normalization had occurred before the 7th of October, many things could have been different. And the events of that day might have been avoided or jointly stopped. Hamas actions and their normalization, Hamas actions and their sympathizers, let's say, in the street of New York, London, Paris, Birmingham, they attempted to stop the normalization with Israel, but the answer to this is right now, I can guarantee them the talks are still ongoing, and normalization is likely to proceed. The alternative, as we've seen, which is what we are witnessing right now, is not desirable by anybody. So a strong Middle East with a strong economy and a decrease or a reduced influence of the Iranian proxy is the goal, and everyone will support such a move.
I'll get one more question for you, Amjad, before I let you go. The Houthis have been more active than ever. I mean, there have been 26, 27 different attacks. There was a significant one with 21 different drones and missiles that were fired at an American ship last night. The Gulf states are the ones that have suffered at the hands of the Houthis for many years. And of course, it was a mistake, I think, on our part here in the United States to remove them from the designation list. But okay, we'll work on that. But what I find interesting right now is that the Gulf Arab states are saying less about the Houthis than they've ever said before, even as they've become more active. So how are we to understand what's going on here right now in terms of the Gulf states' policies?
Well, there is a time of war and there is time of peace. But in the time of war, when the Arab coalition forces liberated the Hodeidah port in Yemen from Houthis terrorists, the US called for a ceasefire at that point, which was shocking for everybody here. And this resulted in the terrorists right now regaining control of the port. Now, from that exact port, Houthis are attacking the international trade and kidnapping the hostages. That was the exact reason why we controlled Hodeidah's port. We are aware of Iran's proxy influence and how to address it, how firmly we need to address it. However, the challenges and the challenge that we have to face sometime is when the UN or the US become involved and are asking us and urging the region to negotiate with terrorists. Negotiating with a terrorist maybe not the best choice, but it has been put forward by the Biden administration. In fact, Houthis in their slogan and in every statement, the Houthis are calling for Americans' death, and yet Biden removed them from the terrorist list. Someone is telling you, "I want the death for you." You say, "Well, you're not a terrorist." That wasn't a great signal to the Middle East, and it did upset many. We are all in favor of political solution for Yemen, but it's difficult to keep that on the table when Houthis behave like ISIS and Al Qaeda, when they strongly attack everyone who crosses from the Red Sea. At some cases, not all, and I'm saying that at some cases, not all. It's sad that sometimes when the U.S. military turns to a news agency, it suggests that the world is in trouble and America is in itself. Because what I've seen recently, the U.S. military on Twitter, it's X right now, the U.S. military keeps saying Yemen's Houthis terrorists attacked this and that ship in the Red Sea. For God's sake, you aren't a news agency. You are the American army. You should respond strongly and firmly, not just report and post, but take a decisive decision. This is what we expect from America. And this, when we see this kind of strong, decisive action, believe it or not, many people in the region will stand strongly with America. But when they see not much, and they're just a normal reaction to, oh, Houthis launch a rocket, and then we just launch another rocket on two people, and not solving the whole issue with these terrorists. And not even at this point, they targeting American, they targeting the Red Sea. Guess what? They're still off that terrorist list. They're not in the terrorist. They're not even being considered to be on the terrorist list. Guess what? Houthis are in our terrorist list. Hamas is in our terrorist list. Guess what? Hamas, up to this point, is not in the terrorist list in many countries in Europe. In Europe.
Correct.
They are Muslim Brotherhood, who are the thoughts and everything that make Hamas. They're still not recognized as terrorist organization by United States of America. It's recognized by us because we understand the Middle East. We are the Middle Eastern. We know these guys are no good for humanity, not just for us. But the question remains one more comment, if possible. Why haven't the Palestinian Authority, not Hamas, Palestinian Authority, or any party in the West Bank condemned or rejected the use of Houthis militia using the name Palestine, using Gaza and Palestine in their attack against the trade in the Red Sea? Why do they remain silent? Why do they remain silent when international terrorists use the Palestinian cause for their attacks? It's like someone committing a crime in your name and you're silent. In fact,
it's a good question. And Secretary Blinken, of course, was in Ramallah today speaking with Mahmoud Abbas, and that was exactly the message that should have been delivered. I think you're right. Well, Amjad Taha, I want to thank you very much for joining us today. Really terrific to speak with you. Hope you'll come back again, and have a great rest of your day.
Thank you.
Okay, here are the other stories FDD is following today. My colleague Elaine Dezensky has a piece out in Euronews looking at the upside-down world of the United Nations, where Russia and China are redefining terms like anti-corruption, human rights, democracy, and integrity. We all knew the UN was a disaster. Elaine just shows that it's worse than we thought. My colleagues Behnam Bentaloglu and John Hardy, Iran and Russia specialists, respectively, are tracking reports that an Iranian-made kamikaze drone was downed in Ukraine. FDD experts continue to make the case that Iranian drones and missiles used by Russia in its war against Ukraine make something abundantly clear, and that is namely that America and Europe have to work together to respond to the Russian-Iranian partnership. A stronger response is long overdue. And finally, speaking of Ukraine and Russia, my colleagues Toby Dershowitz and Zvi Khan penned a policy brief yesterday marking the 4th anniversary of Iran's downing of a Ukrainian airliner, killing all 176 people on board. 4 years on, Canada has still been unwilling to impose serious economic and political consequences on the Iranian regime. Hey, Prime Minister Trudeau, you know what you have to do. We all do. That's it for today. Read our expert analysis on our website, fdd.org. Read our quick takes on X at FDD, and support our work with a tax-deductible donation at fdd.org/invest. Thanks for tuning in today. I'll see you Friday for another morning brief. Until then, I'm Jonathan Shanzer, signing off.